Namaskar to all of you, and thank you Mitudi for especially the beautiful last song which just takes us to the child form of the divine, and how sometimes it's one experience to be at the feet of the divine and other to just embrace the divine as a child, and it brings that closeness. So thank you for starting today's satsang on such an embrace to the divine. This is a series that we are doing on the book Synthesis of Yoga, written by Sri Aurobindo, and today's talk is on the chapter The Law of Sacrifice, the Sacrifice, and the Triune Path. When we hear the word sacrifice, it kind of brings different meanings, both positive and negative, in us. It evokes different kinds of emotions in us when we hear the word sacrifice. One of the meanings that comes to mind is that sacrifice is putting one's own desires and needs aside and working for others. Another would be to share one's own possessions or perceived possessions with others. Another meaning, more negative or violent in a sense, also comes as of a animal sacrifice, which is a common practice in various parts of the world. So the first question in front of us in today's talk is that what really is the meaning of sacrifice, and why is it actually important on the path of yoga? If God created us out of love, did He send us here to enjoy life, embrace life, or to sacrifice? So what really is the meaning of sacrifice, and why is it important? To understand this, it is good to reflect on how the universe began. The science would say it began with a big bang and matter was created. And from a spiritual perspective, the divine was present as an immutable, formless being, and it created or initiated the process of creating matter. And matter by itself, the very nature is that it is full of inertia and ignorance. And along with it, as a companion, was created the sacrifice. A divine power descended along with it as a companion in order to correct and limit and illumine the creation, the matter, out of its ignorant state, which is full of separation, division, seeking after harmony, and full of its own egoism of physical individuality. So a divine power descended as a companion, as a sacrifice, to illumine the matter. And if we look at it, what is that divine power? It is that power which is present within every form of creation, including human beings. One may call it the divine soul. In one of the last chapters, we talked about how Sri Aurobindo says it's important to accept and embrace our outer life as a half-veiled manifestation of the divine. It's not about detaching from life, but accepting life as a half-veiled manifestation of the divine. As complementary to this idea, it is also important for the ego to acknowledge the presence that deep presence of a loving sacrifice behind our actions. It is important for the ego to acknowledge that we are not alone. It is not alone in this human system. There is at the background a loving, divine, sacrificial power which at every moment is constantly harmonizing, balancing, illuminating every part of our being and every action. And this acknowledgement and gratitude of the ego is one of the starting points on the path of yoga. As a doctor, very often we see two paradigms towards disease and health. One paradigm is that human body is like a machine, and if there is a disease, then it is something which has gone wrong with the machine and it needs to be fixed from outside with some tools or some objects or medicines. And fix, this is a very common term used in medicine these days, to fix the body. The other paradigm to look at the human system is that even if we have a disease, even if there is something abnormal happening in the body, still 97 to 98% of our being, all the chemical reactions, even at a physical level, is happening in harmony within the body. So the ego may choose to look at the 1% abnormal and build up stories and efforts around it. Or what if the ego chooses to acknowledge and be grateful to that quiet good health within all of us, which quietly at the background continues to harmonize everything. And the more it can acknowledge and be grateful and allow the expansion of the expression of this divine soul or the sacrificial power or the quiet good health, the more it expands this good health from 97 to 98 and more towards 100%. And with that also again the disease fall away naturally in a human system. So how important is this gratitude? In energy medicine we talk about how the moment there is gratitude in the being, every cell of the body becomes receptive to the healing. Mother, in her book on the virtues, gives special importance to gratitude because it is through the gratitude can one receive all the other virtues. It is the one which opens us up to receiving all the divine virtues. But very often it is forgotten, is also one of the key points in that story. So to acknowledge and to be grateful to this divine element, this divine sacrifice within us, is a key starting point on the path of yoga. And from there, the divine soul demands for the subordination and the service of the ego towards this larger purpose with which the divine soul descends, which is the illumination of the matter. So first an acknowledgement and gratitude, and then a submission, a subordination, a surrender to this divine soul. Because if we look at the law of sacrifice, whether or not ego likes it, whether it wants to submit or surrender, the sacrificial law is going to take over irrespective. Because it is a law of giving and receiving. Any form on this earth, in this universe that exists, is constantly in an exchange with its environment. There is an exchange at the physical and vital level. There is an exchange of emotions, thoughts, and ideas. Even when we talk about science from a scientific perspective, it is understood that no matter how hard a matter is or how soft something is, it is constantly having an exchange with its environment. And this very exchange, this very giving and receiving, becomes an opportunity and the key method through which that form evolves and the whole universe evolves. And that is a key element in law of sacrifice. Whether the ego says that I just want to give, or I just want to receive, or I just want to give this and not this, or I want to receive this and not this, it doesn't matter, because the law of sacrifice always takes over. But the fact is that more consciously, the more willingly we allow the exchange to happen, the more likely are we to have fulfillment and maximum possible growth through that exchange. To take a simple example of a shopkeeper or a shop or a businessman, when a shopkeeper sets up a shop, it cannot run by just giving or just by receiving. It is quite obvious that there has to be a constant exchange. He gives out things and receives money or something back in kind. It cannot run in just one of the spaces. And that is how, through this constant exchange, the shop grows and the shopkeeper accumulates wealth. But that shopkeeper and the shop is not just at an exchange with its customers, it is also at an exchange with the land, with the whole country, with the state. And hence, if the shopkeeper chooses to have a conscious exchange and willfully sets aside a certain money for the growth of the collective, or it chooses to pay its taxes honestly, then that brings more success, more growth, more fulfillment for that shopkeeper. But there is that another possibility also, that the ego feels that I can hold on to whatever I'm receiving and I'll cut corners in the taxes. I don't want to give anything away. But very often, here also the law of sacrifice takes over in various different forms, be it a tax raid or a theft or a robbery or so many other forms. Whatever has to go through a person, it will eventually find its way. And even if the person chooses not to let go in some way, very often we observe that that individual may not be able to enjoy what they have. So the joy of the exchange, the growth out of that exchange may not manifest if the person tries to hold on to whatever they have. So this is one aspect, if we look at, of the sacrifice, and this kind of tells us the importance of sacrifice on the path of yoga. But if we look at it, how many individuals on earth are actually having this conscious and willing sacrifice? And Sri Aurobindo remarks here that most often the sacrifice is done unconsciously, egoistically, and without knowledge or acceptance of the true meaning of the great world right. So most people are actually doing it unconsciously. It is so that the vast majority of earth creatures do it, and when it is done unconsciously, the individual derives only a mechanical minimum of the natural inevitable profit. So they are actually deriving very little if it is done unconsciously. it achieves by it only a slow, painful progress, limited and tortured by the smallness and suffering of the ego. Only when the heart, the will, and the mind of knowledge associate themselves with the law and gladly follow it, can there come the deep joy and the happy fruitfulness of the divine sacrifice. So this clearly states to us the importance of sacrifice in our day-to-day life with its true meaning. Now, having understood the importance, the next step is to understand what is the process of sacrifice and how is it different from just a giving, the shopkeeper putting aside the money and feeling I am giving this money out for the well-being of my shop or well-being of the country. What is it that is required? What is the process of sacrifice in order to make it meaningful? And to understand this, it is important to understand the meaning of oneness. Sri Aurobindo here quotes that all true love and all sacrifice are in their essence nature's contradiction to its necessary first fragmentation and separative error. So he says that it is difficult for a human being to go through the process of a conscious sacrifice because in a way it is a nature's contradiction to its necessary first fragmentation, as we just talked about, that how in creation first the nature divides into its multiplicity and separate individuality, whereas a sacrifice and love becomes the method and opportunity to take itself towards the recovery, towards its oneness. So in a way it's a contradiction to our day-to-day way of life, and that is how it becomes difficult or a challenge for any individual or a sadhak to practice this in our day-to-day life. And to understand the process, it is very important to understand the true meaning of oneness or unity. Very often oneness as a word or unity is associated with a certain common ground or a certain commonality between individuals, people forming an association based on a common thought. Our country talking about unity in diversity. So it is generally associated with some commonality. If we take at even a higher level, compassion is associated with the thought that we are all the children of the same divine. So that is very often how we look at the word unity and oneness. And here Sri Aurobindo goes one step further in saying that this unity is not a unity of association, but it's a unity where when we go beyond the superficial separation that we see, and when we go into the depths of the being, where we are all one. This is not a numeric oneness in the sense that if there are 5 people and they call themselves one, then each one of them is 0.2. Or if there are 6 billion people on earth, then each one is 1 divided by 6 billion. So it is not a numeric oneness, but it is a oneness in the essence. In the depths of the being is where we are all one and the same. Whether it is one individual, or it is a group, or it is any animate or inanimate object, or this whole earth, or this whole universe. At the level of essence, we are all one and the same. And this is the true meaning of oneness or unity that Sri Aurobindo refers to here. And a true sacrifice is also, it begins from this experience or understanding of that essence, and it goes out to another individual, penetrating the superficialities, dissolving the ego into the depths of the essence of that individual. And then it naturally becomes into a mutual self-giving. Sri Aurobindo here quotes Yajna in saying that it is not for the sake of the wife, but for the sake of the self that the wife is dear to me. So it remarks on the unity again for the sake of that self or that essence, not for the sake of that separate individual, that somebody else is dear to us. To take an example of husband and wife in terms of unity or in terms of sacrifice, even in any relationship, the sacrifice can manifest at 3 levels. The first being at a very basic physical and vital level, where the unity might appear by a basic physical and vital sacrifice, a mutual concession. I do this for you, you do this for me, a certain level of cooperation, a certain level of putting aside one's own desire and needs and putting the other person first. And that brings in a physical and vital unity. If one goes one step deeper, there can be a mental and emotional unity emerging out of empathy, out of sympathy, out of understanding what really are the wishes of the other individual, and having a relationship of mutual gratification of one's sensory desires, one's emotions. So that can bring in a certain level of unity between a husband and wife at a mental and emotional level. But is this the maximum potential of a relationship of husband and wife? Is it the maximum potential of love? Maybe no, there is a deeper layer, and that again goes to the depths of true love, takes us to the essence of the individual and the essence of the spouse, where this true love truly understands the beauty of this being, truly sees the divinity in that other being, and from that space there is an entire self-giving to the other individual's essence. And that is where the relationship truly fulfills itself. And from there can also be a natural physical and vital and a mental and emotional unity as well, which naturally follows and emerges out of it. And here Sri Aurobindo remarks on what really is this true unity meaning and what it is truly not meaning. And he talks about that the true essence of this sacrifice. So we have talked about one aspect of this sacrifice, but the other aspect of the sacrifice, which very often is mistaken or misinterpreted, is the discipline part which is involved in this sacrifice. And here Sri Aurobindo remarks that the true essence of the sacrifice is not self-immolation, it is self-giving. By self-immolation immolation means burning. So in a true sense, the sacrifice is not a kind of a burning of our being, but it is a self-giving, which we just talked about. Its object is not self-effacement or excluding oneself, forgetting about oneself, but self-fulfillment. Through the example we just discussed, it brings in fulfillment within us. Its method, not self mortification, but a greater life. It is not about killing life, but taking us towards a greater life. It is not a self mutilation. It is not a killing or reducing the physicality in our being, but a transformation of our natural human parts into the divine members. So, through this process of sacrifice, our physicality also grows and gets transformed into its best possible divine possibility. And it is not a self torture. So, sacrifice is not a torture, but a passage from lesser satisfaction to a greater ananda. So it moves us from our lower or lesser satisfactions to a much more expanded form of satisfaction, which one may call as bliss or divine ananda. This meaning or this misinterpretation to the word sacrifice very often happens, especially from the ego, where there is an influence of the titanic forces or the asuric forces. And in that state, the ego becomes magnified. Very often, one's own ideas are seen as the supreme ideas. The religious beliefs are seen as the supreme beliefs or as dogmas. And in that state, maybe the religion doesn't mean it, but how the magnified ego perceives it, it creates a certain suppression or repression, a certain kind of a self-torture or imposition upon oneself and on the others of a certain ideas, rules and regulations. Or it may be a spiritual ego that I have been to the higher states of consciousness and I understand and possess the divine. And again, from that state, there can be that imposition of certain ideas, rules, and regulations, and certain meaning to sacrifice. But that is not what truly sacrifice means. It is not a violence against the self, it is a loving self giving, as we have understood. The mother offers a very simple remedy to both these forms of magnified egos through the line that I know nothing I ought to know, I do nothing I ought to do, I am nothing I ought to be. So it's important to set aside and dissolve this magnified ego and see the true meaning of sacrifice, which is a loving self-giving. Yes, a certain degree of discipline is demanded of us on this path, but this discipline is anchored in kindness and love, and it is accompanied with freedom and inclusiveness. It is not a discipline which says you are wrong and you should not be doing this, this is the way to do things. It says that you're right. There is a certain joy and satisfaction in the way you're doing things. But in process, it also brings that part of our being face to face with the divine Ananda and gradually brings each fragment of our being into a surrender, and from that space the sacrifice becomes natural. So it is a loving encouragement, it's an encouraging discipline and not a discipline of rights and wrongs and torture. And yes, there is a certain degree of saying no to things, but even this no to things or this rejection emerges from a space of yes, our commitment to our own self, our own free will, and a sense of saying yes only and only to the divine influence, so that all the fragments of ego can merge together with the divine. And then, with this discipline coming in, although it is done in the spirit that we do not wish for any return, and it is done out of a space of nishkam karma, yet there is an inner knowing in our hearts that even though I do not demand for anything, what is waiting to be received is the infinite riches of the divine presence and the divine power. And Sri Aurobindo beautifully describes this through these lines. For to the soul that wholly gives itself to Him, God also gives Himself altogether. For to the soul that wholly gives itself to the divine also gives Himself altogether. And then, with the next few lines, he goes on to describe in the nutshell the whole process of yoga in beautiful 3 or 4 lines. And he says that only the one who offers his whole nature finds the self. It's a beautiful line. Only the one who offers his whole nature, the physical, the vital, emotional, mental, spiritual, every part of the being, when it is offered to the divine, can one truly have an experience of the divine presence or self. Only the one who can give everything enjoys the divine all everywhere. Having offered one's whole nature to the divine and having had an experience of the self, the next step is to give all that one seems to possess, be it the material possessions, the wealth, be it the relationships, be it all one's knowledge, physical knowledge or spiritual knowledge, be it one's commitments, be it one's vows that person has taken. And that is the test which was posed to Arjuna, where his source of knowledge, Guru Dron, sat on the other side, and the vows of his lineage, Bhishma, sat on the other side. So only when we are able to offer the whole being or all that one seems to possess or is attached to that divine center, can one truly enjoy the divine all everywhere. Because we talked about how the process of sacrifice is about reaching out to the essence of the other person's being. And for that, one needs to offer all that one possesses to the self within. And then he goes one step further in saying, only a supreme self-abandonment attains to the supreme. So here, when one goes beyond the universe into the transcendent being, there a sense of self is lost, a sense of I and they is lost completely. And he refers to this as a supreme self-abandonment. And then only one can experience truly that supreme union with the Satchidananda. And lastly, only the sublimation by the sacrifice of all that we are can enable us to embody the highest and live here in the eminent consciousness of the transcendent spirit. And the last step is the sacrifice, when we can truly commit to this process of sacrifice, the exchange and entire self-giving to the essence. Can one actually truly sublimate one's whole nature and embody the divine spirit? So these 4 lines, which starts with offering one's whole nature in order to have an experience of the self, followed by a whole complete giving of all one's possessions and attachments in process of enjoying the divine all everywhere, to the process of a supreme self-abandonment for a transcendent experience and connection, to a complete sacrifice in the here and now in order to embody the divine. And through these lines, Sri Aurobindo describes the whole process of yoga. So, to summarize the process of sacrifice, it is an offering of all one's works, either directly to the Divine Godhead or through the individuals to their essence. It is done in the spirit of an entire self-giving. It is done with an aspiration of greater joy, ananda, and fulfillment. And it is done with a discipline which is not harsh, but does demand a certain degree of firmness and rejection. And as one grows in this process of sacrifice, Sri Aurobindo talks about the three beautiful outcomes or results of the process of sacrifice. The first being that it takes an individual naturally to the heights of devotion. Just the experience of a self-giving to another individual evokes love within us. And when this self-giving is to the divine, then naturally it evokes a purest form of love and a highest form of devotion. So bhakti is naturally inbuilt in this process of sacrifice. The second outcome is that since this whole process demands a constant remembrance of the central essence or the central divine presence and its dynamic element within us, the whole process naturally becomes into a living, walking, talking meditation. And he writes that on its summit, it rises into a constant living and thinking and willing and acting in the presence of the supramental and the transcendent. So it not only turns into a bhakti, but also brings us very close to the supramental and the transcendent. And thirdly, it eliminates any support of ego that one may take on the path of yoga, because ego has its own ways of finding its way, and the most common ways is altruism or service. As a way, serving the needy is where the ego will find its support, or a kind of an indifference. So it eliminates all these supports because the action is not happening for a needy. The action is not happening for a family or a friend. It is not happening out of one's own personal preference. It's happening from the essence to the essence, which is the same in all. So the process of a true sacrifice naturally eliminates all supports to the ego, and then life becomes more and more the sacrifice of the eternal in the individual, constantly self-offered to the eternal transcendent. Life becomes more and more the sacrifice of the eternal in the individual, constantly self-offered to the eternal transcendent. So it becomes a loop from the transcendent through the individual back again to the transcendent, and the ego is eliminated out of the way. So just to share some of the key insights and actionables from today's talk. The first one being the acknowledgement and the gratitude from the ego that it is not alone in a human system. There is something deeper there which is constantly harmonizing. This acknowledgement that I am not alone, there is something behind, always. And second is this gratitude, which is easier said than done, because again, the default mode for the mind and for the body is to go back to the I and separation. So, working on that gratitude, writing that gratitude, letting that gratitude reach every cell of the body. And one of the simplest practice to do that is to write a gratitude journal every night before sleep, and being grateful to that sacrificial power within us for all that happened. And that is the way, because it's one thing to listen to this and hear all this for myself and for everyone, but it's the other thing for it to reach every cell or every, as they say, कि हड्डी तक पहुंच जाना चाहिए, to the matter, the most inert part of us acknowledges and is grateful to that divine presence. The third is to be in a state of deeper and deeper in acceptance and love towards oneself, and asking oneself the question that can I feel the presence of the divine in the present moment? So having, through concentration, through acceptance and love, which takes her to the depths of our own being and to the beings of others, and through that process having an experience of the self. Thirdly, just experiencing the joy of self-giving, just being in that experience. What is it like? How does it feel to give oneself completely to someone or to the divine? Just staying with that experience and then bringing it more and more lovingly, and choosing more and more of this experience over the fleeting pleasures and happiness and satisfaction in our life. And lastly, a prayer, because this is something Sri Aurobindo always sets such high standards and gives us such enormous work to do. So it can't be complete without a prayer to the divine and allowing the divine grace to come in and do this work through us. I personally like to start my day with this prayer. I accept and love myself deeply, and I seek strength to accept whoever I meet today as is. May I consciously and sincerely serve anyone and everyone I meet today. May no speck of greed or ego deform the service. So any form of prayer is very important for the sacrifice to manifest, because it cannot happen without the grace of the divine. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinah, Sarve Santu Niramaya, Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu, Ma Kaschid Dukh Bhag Bhavet. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Brahmanandam Paramasukhadam Kevalam Jnanamurtim Dvandatitam Gagana Sadrishyam Tattvam Asyadi Lakshayam Ekam Nityam Vimalam Achalam Sarvadhi Sakshi Bhutam. Sadgurum Tam Namami. Thank you. Dr. Bijlani, would you like to add something?
Thank you, Mankul. In fact, if you had not asked me today, I wouldn't have come here, because after that beautiful prayer with which you ended, nothing more really would be appropriate. And all I can do is to summarize the summary with which you ended. You started with sacrifice, the popular understanding of sacrifice, giving up something pleasant voluntarily because you think that something unpleasant that you accept in return is important, valuable, precious to somebody else. For example, a mother giving up her sleep for the sake of a sick child is sacrificing her sleep. Or a soldier who is prepared to or actually sacrifices life for the country is giving up life which is very dear to each of us for the sake of something which he considers more important than even his own life. And that is the popular meaning of sacrifice. But on the path of yoga, sacrifice or giving up something is not giving up something which we find pleasant for the sake of something unpleasant just because it happens to be important and precious in some other ways. It is giving up something for the sake of getting something which gives still greater joy. There's a story of a king who prostrated himself in front of a sage and told him that I revere you, I respect you, I worship you because you have given up so much of worldly comforts. The sage said, if that is the reason, I should prostrate myself in front of you because of all the joys that you have given up. You have given up the joy that comes from absence of desire, the joy that comes from being closer to the divine for the sake of running the affairs of the nation. So I should be prostrating myself in front of you. In a sense, what it comes down to is that sacrifice is about giving up something. It's about giving. And how can we give something? We can give something because we have received it from somewhere. And therefore, another less popular meaning of the word sacrifice is yajna. In fact, yajna is a typically Indian word, and it is commonly translated into English as sacrifice because at least one thing is common to both. In yajna you offer an ahuti, and in sacrifice also you give up something. So the essence of sacrifice is giving something. But the sacred meaning of sacrifice, or the sacred sacrifice which we call yajna, involves not just giving the ahuti, but it also involves gratitude for the one who gave us so that we could give. So we can give only if we have received. But then if everyone is giving only what one has received, there has to be at least an ultimate giver who did not have to receive from anywhere because it had everything and just gave to its creation. So the ultimate giver is the divine. So the ultimate giver is the divine, and it is the Mahayagya of the divine who has given everything all together, as Mankul mentioned, that the rest of us can give something. So the ultimate giver is one. After that it is all just recycling. We keep giving something because we received, and then the one who receives from us can give what he has received, and so on. So whether it is money or an object, or whether it is knowledge, whatever we are able to give is because we received it from someone, and that someone received it from someone else. And if we keep going back, there is only one ultimate giver, and that is the divine, that is the source from where everything came, and the rest is all recycling. Another thing which I may dwell upon a little is that beautiful sentence which from Aurobindo, which Mankul talked about. It is not for the wife, but for the self that the wife is dear to me. Now, here the self is with a capital S. Because otherwise one would say that it should be for the sake of the wife that we should be loving her, that she should be dear to me. Because one of the popular ways of putting it is that I love you for what you are, as you are. I don't want you to change. I don't want you to be as I would like you to be. I love you for what you are, as you are. Now, this seems to contradict that. But in fact, there is no contradiction. In fact, that is the ultimate, taking this very sentence that I love you for what you are to its ultimate logical conclusion. Because what she is and what I am and what all the rest of the creation is the divine. And therefore, I love her for the divine that she is, the manifestation of the divine that she is, her essence which is the divine. So that is the true self of each individual, of all creation, and that we write with a capital S. So it is for that that the wife is dear to me. And finally, what is the place of sacrifice in yoga? And the path of yoga involves basically expressing our love. Love for those around us, be it human beings, be it a plant, be it an animal. So it is an expression of love. And love is expressed by giving what we have to those who need it. Sometimes we get a feeling that, as Mankul said, that we are doing some social service, we are helping somebody and so on. But then that is not the right way to look at it, because in fact, that person whom we think we are giving something is offering us an opportunity to give, and thereby facilitating our own spiritual growth, facilitating our own progress on the path of yoga. That is good. But then the idea of sacrifice adds one more remembrance to this. As he said, what is that reminder? That not only this person is giving me an opportunity to grow spiritually, to grow in consciousness, to make some progress on the spiritual path, but it is also a reminder that I am able to give, even when the opportunity is available, I am able to give because I received it from somewhere. So that reminder comes from the concept of sacrifice. And therefore, it further refines and purifies the process of giving, not just giving as something which is an opportunity provided by some other person or some situation. It is not only because of the opportunity I received, but what I am able to give is because I received it from somewhere, and the opportunity that I got also I received from somewhere, and the fact that I could perceive that opportunity as an opportunity also was given by the same. So it is that, which means that in the process, one keeps minimizing the role of oneself as an individual. One keeps minimizing the role of the self with a small s in the whole process, that is, as an individual. So that is one keeps minimizing, but not through that extreme form of what we may call humility, but actually it's a denying what we truly are, as he again said, that I am nothing, I can give nothing, I can do nothing because I am nothing. Now, yes, that can have a justification, but the fact is that one also has to acknowledge with gratitude that I have received something, and therefore that receiving has to be received with gratitude, and that gratitude has to be expressed by giving out of love what I have received to someone who needs it. So that is also important, apart from realizing that I am nothing. Yes, I am nothing because I am basically the divine, not an individual as I am seen and as I see myself. I am not that. So in that sense, I am nothing. But then ignoring that and minimizing the significance of that self with a small s is what helps us discover what we truly are, that is the self with the capital S. So one can say that the whole process is about forgetting oneself to discover the self. Forgetting oneself, forgetting the self with the small s to discover the self with the capital S. Forgetting and ignoring what we are on the surface so that we can discover our true essence, the divine. And in that, sacrifice plays an important role, because not only it makes us give with a sense of love, out of love, but it also reminds us that we are able to give only because we received.